Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hasan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast bonus. There's no book reading, usually, on these bonus episodes. These typically tend to be interviews, rants, raves, insights, and other gentle and sometimes more confrontational audio musings, and of course, conversations with interesting people about leadership. Because listening to me and an interesting guest talk about leadership for at least a couple of hours, or maybe as little as an hour and a half, is still better than reading and trying to understand yet another business book, especially that business book written by a large language algorithm that calls itself AI that thinks it's smarter than you. That's going to be a real problem coming up. We'll talk more about that on the podcast, but not today. Our guest today has an extensive background, only some of which I will read, and then we will get into at a deeper level as we continue, or as we draw out, as we have our conversation today. So he enlisted into the United States Army in 1998, which makes him a member of the tail end of Generation X, like myself. I graduated high school in 1997. And he has served with a plethora of companies, task forces, and teams across the length and breadth of the United States Army, including Brigade S9, non-commissioned officer in headquarters and headquarters company, 1st Brigade Combat Team, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division, instructor for Civil Affairs Qualifications Course and Operations in COIC for Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Special Warfare Training Group A, and Battalion School's non-commissioned officer and battalion leadership development instructor in headquarters and headquarters company, 51st Signal Battalion A, 35th Signal Brigade A, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And if you think I just said a mouthful there, you're correct. His deployment experience includes 2 deployments to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom with Bravo Company, 51st Signal Battalion A, 35th Signal Brigade A, as well as 3 deployments in the southern Philippines, 1 deployment to Afghanistan, and 2 deployments to Hawaii. And out of all those places, you could probably guess which one I've actually been to. And it wasn't the Philippines or Afghanistan. He is a graduate of Warrior Leaders Course, Advanced Leaders Course with honors, and Senior Leaders Course with honors. He also holds a certificate in Business Administration and Operations Leadership, a certificate in Leadership and Management, as well as an Associate's in General Education, all from Fayetteville Technical Community College. He is a graduate of the University of Charleston, West Virginia, and holds a Bachelor of Science in Organizational Leadership. His awards and decorations are manifold, including the Bronze Star Medal and the Philippine Bronze Cross Medal. In addition to all of that, my guest today is married to the former Candace Williams-Daly and has 2 sons, Ethan and Thomas, and 2 daughters, Kennedy and Catherine. Just like myself, he's got 4 kids. I would presume that they are all, well, they're all of the age where he's still in it. He's still in the game. And the game, as DMX used to say, the game is deep and the pain is brief. And it happens every day. And so I would like to welcome to the podcast, Calen Bullard. How you doing, Calen?
Doing fairly well, thank you. Yeah.
All right. So what's it like to have your entire resume read to you? What's that like?
It's unfamiliar, I guess. I mean, most of the time you're reading it, and remembering stuff. Well, you're reading it off, and it's just all flooding back. So
Right.
it's a little weird, I
A little
guess.
weird. A
Yeah,
little
a
weird.
little weird when you when you
Well,
when you start rattling it off. So and you go through when you say 51st Signal Battalion A, it's every single one of those A's. That's an airborne unit. So it's 51st Signal Battalion Airborne, 82nd
mhm.
Airborne Division, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. So I mean, it all reads right, but it's either special operations or it's airborne. And you'll see those at the end of a variety of units all across. I mean, you got
Mhm.
anything from SF groups to, you know, tab units. It just
Yep.
depends on it's military lingo is tough to follow.
Sometimes it is for those of us in the civilian world, and on this podcast we've interviewed several folks, either around books, and had conversations with them around their favorite books, or just straight interviews with folks that do have a strong military background, because quite frankly, and I always kind of have to say this on the podcast because there's always new listeners and people who they just don't have an awareness of where we are at or what we're doing in the world. For the last 25 years, we've been war making all across the globe, for good or ill, and we don't get into the politics of that here. I always say, though, and actually I said this to somebody else in a private conversation yesterday, I always say that there's only things you can learn in a certain kind of way, only lessons you can learn in a certain kind of way from having a bullet fly past your ear and then having to deliver a bullet past the ear of somebody else. And you cannot learn them in any other kind of way, including leadership lessons. And so I value people who come from that background, and I value their experiences, and I like to bring them to my listeners and talk about them on the podcast, but also to sort of figure out how we can synthesize all of those lessons together, into not only into the civilian world, but how we can merge those two spheres together. And so I hope to be able to do some of that today.
So
And
it's always a learning process. It's
exactly.
always a learning process, and when you're dealing with leadership, when you're dealing with people, it's a constant adapting and learning, because that's what adapting is learning. So
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and we are in a time of adaptation. One of the ideas that I've been really focused on this last year on the podcast has been the idea that, and it is a challenging idea. And I just want you to, before I ask you the first question, because I haven't really asked you a question yet, but as we kind of go through the podcast, I want you to sort of roll this idea over in your head. But I think historically we're at the end of a chaotic period. And I know it seems weird because everybody looks out and all they see is chaos, but I think this is the last dregs of the old chaos, kind of like a cornered rat. You know, it's going to fight all the way to the end, but then when it's done, it's done. And I think we're getting to the end of that in what I call the fourth turning. And on the other side of that will be a springtime of awakening, and a springtime of advancement. And I think that that's going to be a great thing for America. And so I like bringing on people who are coming out of, as I mentioned in the opening, Generation X, who I believe will be those future leaders in this upcoming spring. And I think their insights are going to be valuable for the two younger generations we have floating around the world right now, the millennials and Gen Zers, who have had significantly different life experiences than the ones that we had. So I don't know if you agree with that thesis or if you want to challenge that, but I want to let you float it around in your head as I ask you this first question. So, for our listeners, what is it that you do exactly?
like professionally.
Professionally, personally, wherever you want to start.
Okay. So professionally, I'm a retired soldier, um, and I now essentially take care of veterans the same way I took care of soldiers when I was in the military. You know, I teach, coach, and mentor veterans and service members and their families on benefits, um, be it healthcare to education to you name it, they need it. I'll connect them to it.
Mm-hmm.
So my official title is Veteran Peer Services Coordinator, certified by the Texas Veterans Commission. That is a position that falls under the Veterans Mental Health Department, whose mission is to reduce veteran suicide. That's essentially what we are in the business of doing, is mitigating crisis that veteran service members and their families are experiencing as quickly in real time as we possibly can, so that we can combat veteran suicide number that's consistently on the up and down, depending on time of year, depending on politics, economics, a variety of things cause that stuff to happen. So what I essentially do is teach, coach, and mentor. I'm just doing it for veterans instead of soldiers now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's go into the background of that, because that's a tough area to talk about out loud. When I was working in higher education, I worked with a lot of students living in high-rise apartment buildings. I did that for close to a decade. And when you do that, a percentage of those students is going to engage in self-harm and is going to engage in suicidal ideation. It just comes with the territory, right? And so I've had those conversations, and I'm not minimizing them. I've had those conversations with people who are on the edge or on the brink or ready to go over, or even in some cases tried to go over and maybe it didn't succeed. So from their perspective, not from perspective of others, right? And so I've had those conversations and I've been in that space, but not nearly to the depth that you've been in that space. So my follow-up question there to that is, how did you wind up in this space? Sort of walk us through how you wound up in that space starting in 1998, because I'm sure you didn't come into the U.S. Army in 1998 going, hey, I'm going to ultimately work with veterans and around suicide. That's going to be where I'm going to end up.
No, that was far from it. So I'd like to say everything goes back to childhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was raised drinking out the garden hose and
Mm-hmm.
riding my bike, all across town, going to Blockbuster and renting video games to bring back home to play for the weekend, to drop off on Sunday night, so you don't get a late fee.
Right.
That kind of generation is what I came up with, and not really having any idea what exactly I was wanting to do. I didn't really figure. I still don't even know what I want to do when I talk about it. So it's like, it comes down to I was a sophomore in high school, and my high school invited and approved for junior ROTC for Air Force to be added to the curriculum at my high school, which was
Mm-hmm.
great. But it was also the first year that they started block scheduling. So I ended up joining junior ROTC Air Force edition for the PE credit, because I was not very athletically inclined, right? So I was, couch potato, Friday night, Family Matters, watching, Home Improvement, all that stuff, where it was like Friday night, you're watching TV, right? So with the
On
family.
ABC. That's right.
There you go. So that was the thing that I grew up with. So when I was time to go, play football or whatever, I was not interested in sports. It just completely turned me off. And so when I got to high school, I was like, wait a minute, you mean I can not get all sweaty and nasty and still get a PE credit? Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll do that. So for the first 6 months or the first semester of that, and it was also the first block schedule. So we went from 7 credits per year to 8 credits per year, with 4 per semester. And so I was grandfathered in, being that my first freshman year, I only needed a certain number of credits to graduate. So I was able to pick up extra credits sophomore, junior, senior year. So I actually graduated high school 6 months early in December.
Wow. Okay.
And then I joined the military in March, and I graduated and walked the stage at basic training the same week that my graduating class walked the stage at high school. So I was already in service by the time my class graduated. But the thing that comes down to it is I went during junior ROTC. I went from being my first actual positive affirmation came from that right up there. That top one that's right up there is actually a certificate for my first accomplishment in junior ROTC, which was most improved cadet, right? So I went from being in the gray man, like in the back, not doing anything at the beginning of the year, to at the end of the year, I'm out in front, like calling commands for drill team and color guard.
Okay.
Summer camps. I went to the ROTC summer camps for junior ROTC. That was then ended up my senior year because I was graduating early. I ended up as the cadet corps commander for the first semester. I left. I got a letter of recommendation from my ROTC instructor. I enlisted. I was the youngest guy in my basic training company, but I was also one of the highest ranking. So I kind of had it pretty bad from the get-go. But I mean, all in all, joining it when I did was essentially my way out, right? I wanted to get out of my hometown. I wanted to get away from where I grew up. I wanted to go out and see some other things. But also, I mean, I was 17 and I needed a job.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody makes, good choices when they're growing up. I ended up having being 17, enlisted in the military with a wife and child on the way. So I
Okay.
had my child about 3 weeks before I turned 18 while I was at AIT at Fort Gordon. So my
Okay.
oldest son, Ethan, is now 25, going on
Right.
26. So it's no coincidence that I retired at 21 years, the year that my son turned 21.
Right.
So when you're 17 and you can't get a job anywhere, it kind of like it
Right.
starts showing. Now, I would have joined a lot sooner had the Air Force recruiter not messed me around a little bit. January, February timeframe, he pushed me off 2 months, and I was like, you know what, I ain't got time to wait around. So the Army started looking pretty nice, but I did. I enlisted, and I ended up going to spent 8 years in my first unit at Fort Bragg as a non-airborne personnel, and then after 2 tours to Iraq, I ended up essentially got tired of what they like to call the big green weenie, and ended up being told by the branch manager for my MOS. I was a radio operator. It was pretty much like, hey, we're going to force reclass you, and you're going to go over to across the street to 82nd Airborne Division and carry a man pack for the lieutenant. And I was just like, no, I'm not. I had about a year. I had about a year and a half and some change left before after I was contemplating getting out at 8 years and being done. And a buddy of mine, he said, no, man, you need to talk to this guy. And he gave me a business card for Sergeant First Class Jamie Rodriguez. And I called up this dude and I was like, hey, man, what do you got for him? He's like, well, come on over here and talk to me. And I'm going to tell you, when I met this dude, he had the most beautiful mane of hair that I've ever seen in my entire life. And I was like, there's no way this dude is Sergeant First Class with hair like that. And I'm going to tell you, he's like, man, well, civil affairs, man. Let me tell you about what it is. So I did civil affairs, which was essentially, if you look at the triad of the special operations community, you got a pyramid, right? And the tip of the spear at that pyramid at the top, you got the Green Berets, you got the SF, the ODAs, you got the big, mean, ugly guys that bag and tag and do all kinds of bad things to bad people, right? And then supporting them underneath on the other corners, you got the psychological operations. They're the voice and the message essentially for operations, for special operations. So, and then you've got the civil affairs side, which they're the face and the handshake. So you got these three entities working together in order to complete the mission, which most of the time was along some type of counterterrorism activity of sorts, or support the host nation government at, aid and assist type missions, depending on where you're at. If you're over in Afghanistan, you're doing a completely different mission than if you're over in the Philippines, right?
Of course.
Combat zone versus host nation support stuff. So, but that triad of individuals being able to support each other and understanding like what your role is in the task at hand, when out there doing it, you're not going to find a better team, right? So most of what I learned leadership wise, so there's two folds to this. There is as the example of what not to do as a leader, and then the example of what you are supposed to do as a leader. So for my first 8 years, I only knew one flavor of leadership, right? Just that one, and that was, coercive dictator. Hey, let's play paper rock rank. I win. Go do what you're told, kind of thing. To the actual effective, deliberate leadership that comes from being in special operations, where it's, people are more important than equipment. You have you follow basically the 12 soft imperatives. And as long as you are operating within those 12 soft imperatives and you're taking care of your people, you're going to have a smooth ride, and everybody's going to be everybody's going to be taking care of everybody else. So it just comes down to seeing both sides of that coin and being able to tailor various leadership styles from throughout my career, I think, is what really has allowed me to become adaptable as I am to the situations that I find myself in when I'm dealing with a variety of individuals, be it a veteran who is suffering a mental health crisis in the moment, to a grieving, surviving spouse for a fallen veteran, to that service member who got picked up for DUI back home, in Erath County, who was just home on leave and just made a poor choice. It just turns into, there's a variety of opportunity to make an impact as to how you approach all those situations, as a leader, as a veteran, as a peer, you name it. That's what I can be in that moment, just based on the two sides of that leadership coin that I've been able to use.
Yeah.
I actually prefer nobody wants to be in that dictatorship type leadership role where the only reason somebody's doing it is because they have respect for the position and the rank and not the person. So I think that you can run in and identify a lot of different like toxic leadership traits to identify people who are there for selfish reasons and doing it for individual versus team, advancement. So it just comes down to, I like to be the team player and give credit where credit's due. Right. So it's just going all the way back and all the experience that I've had. My childhood was a big impact. My first duty station, which was my last duty station, right? I'll talk about that later, but when I say that, my first unit that I went to, and then that transition piece where I decided, I don't want to stop doing Army, but I don't want to be where I'm at anymore. Really said something, because it comes down to retention rates. If you guys, just like any business that has a company that just turnover's high, you've got poor reviews coming in from clients or customers, whatever it is you're selling, whatever you're doing. Most likely it's not the product, and it's not the employees. It's your middle management, your senior management, not doing their job as a effective leader to, provide proper motivation and direction and guidance to get the job done effectively. Nobody wants their time wasted. And that's the one thing that I learned in the military. Like, you really want to piss off some soldiers, waste their time.
Waste their time.
And that's the one thing the military is known for, is hurry up and wait. Like, just government in general, hurry up and wait. You owe Uncle Sam something, they'll reach in your bank account, take it from you. But man, if Uncle Sam owes you something, you can take a number and stand in line. We'll get to you next year.
Right.
So it just depends on those kinds of perspectives. But
so there's a lot there that you gave me. No, it was great. It was fabulous. I was taking notes the whole time you were talking. And, I find it interesting that, you started out as a 17-year-old who just wanted to sort of get away from where you were and get out and have new experiences. And that opened the door to, not to make it sound heroic, but this is the word, it opened the door to further adventures, right? It opened the door to further things that you probably couldn't have anticipated. Going back to that for just a second, one of the challenges of our current era, of our current time, and this podcast does focused heavily on in our second year, was the meaning crisis is the meaning crisis among young men. Right now, you talk about suicides among veterans. Suicides among young men overall are way up. Young men are struggling in our culture, and I have a heart for this. Young men are struggling in our culture to find meaning and to define themselves. And so as an American society, we've done a really awesome job of elevating our girls and our women and putting them in positions of leadership. education, all that kind of good stuff. We've done a really good job of that. We have not done a good job. We just haven't. And this is where I'm coming at it from this angle. We have not done a good job of defining what meaning looks like for young males. And so the question that I have for you is this: every young male, like when you were 17, you were the same way, needs a task to go on in order to develop meaning. And you said you had a wife and a kid on the way, and and I'm not saying that every 17-year-old male needs to have a wife and a child. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that sense of the gas in the tank, right? Being, hey, these people got to eat and they're looking at me,
Yeah.
that gave you meaning. Talk a little bit about how maybe we can not solve the meaning crisis, but what are the ways that young men can get meaning in this culture, in particular when you have I believe it's less than 0.1% of the available male population in America serves in the military. So clearly that's a non-starter with the vast majority of Gen Zers and millennials for a whole variety of reasons that we don't need to get into. That's a non-starter. So how do we solve for that meaning crisis? Because I do ask folks when they come on, and I was asking them all last year in our last season, what do we do around this? How do we solve this challenge? Because it is the challenge of our time. Because if you have young women who are accomplished, quite frankly, they're going to want to marry young men who are accomplished. They're not going to want to marry young men who are not accomplished. And you have daughters, I have daughters, and we don't want them marrying young men that are unaccomplished, right? So how do we resolve this? What were some ideas you have, maybe? And I know this is a challenge question. It's not on the list, but it is something that pops up from your experience. Yeah.
No, it's absolutely. I think it's valid, actually.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is actually extremely valid, especially in today's like society. And I'm just speaking specifically just our culture in America society.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, you could go macro all day. I mean, we can go, down to micro. But I'm just saying, just in American culture today, with the being a parent, like I have two adult children that are out in the world already doing their thing, right?
Right.
And I have two young children that are still at the home that are in, they're not even in middle school yet.
Yeah.
So kind of turns into, when I look at what needs to be done, like I have control over what I have control over.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think what it turns into is I know the expectation that I have for my children. The problem is being from the generation that I'm from and having the experience I have, it has taken everything for me to turn off the NCO, the non-commissioned officer that I have buried inside of me, to treat them as 7 and 9-year-old children and not soldiers, because they don't have that they don't know that expectation when there's no basic training for them
No.
to establish any of that. So everything that they know from the parent. So when it comes to like children in general, and we can talk about strong male role model in the house. We can talk about, be the example in the home. Like I try to exhibit a demeanor and a persona for my son to reflect as the man that he should try to strive to be. And for my daughter, I try to do the same for the type of man that she wants to marry. Right. So it really just comes down to morals, ethics, values, establishing accountability and responsibility at a young age, and not placating to those feelings that most people would placate to at that young age. If they're wrong, they're wrong.
Sure.
And being identified as such and saying, hey, no, this is wrong. But giving children, you got to give them enough grace to learn. And
Right.
so it just comes down to the crisis that we're having with young men today, not stepping up to the plate, or not being capable, or not having the motivation or the drive or the whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all an individual event. I mean, you can turn to your left, you can turn to your right, you can point fingers all you want, but everybody has the ultimate, I'm going to make this happen. right? And it's more one of those kind of like, it's the difference in stepping up to a challenge, right? And
Mhm.
saying, I'm going to continue to just do this because I'm comfortable with it,
Mhm.
versus stepping up to a challenge and saying, you know what, I think I got this down. I'm ready for something a little bit harder. I'm going to go for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And that's going to be the difference between like, development and growth versus just stagnation and death. So those
Yeah.
two things kind of go hand in hand. So if you're not actually pushing forward to the next thing, then why are you even bothering doing anything? Like,
Mhm.
don't even bother. Just, you might as well just stop breathing. I think that's really what's happening with a lot of them, is they just see what is going on around them in society, and they think that, it's not going to get any better. I
Right.
mean, especially with when they look at it from an economy side of the house to the political side to, uh, you know, everything from wages to interest rates to, credit ratings, and everything just starts to build on. And you're taking, kids are not being prepared for that by their parents
Mhm.
nor the education system. So it really comes down to, I think there's an unrealistic expectation that most parents in America today have on what the education system is supposed to be doing for them.
Mhm.
And so that unrealistic expectation is ending in failure and not preparing the individuals to go out into society and actually be successful. And I mean, it turns into, there's a number of other dynamics that you can go into and really whittle down to those individual opportunities and situations. Well, what if this, what if that? But really, I think it really just comes down to uh, providing the right example
Mhm.
for the child in the home. I don't care who their parent is, as long as their parent is doing the right thing and doing things right,
Mhm.
they're gonna get what they need out of it. Um, and it just kind of turns into they're gonna have that internal drive or they're not. And they're either
Right.
gonna get that from the right example or the wrong example, but they're gonna emulate what it is that they see every single day.
Right.
So it just comes down to, if you want your kids to do better, you do better.
Right.
Right. So I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, I one of the things that I do say on this podcast is all of our leadership problems, and quite frankly, all of our leadership solutions, really do begin at the smallest level. And family is the first organizational culture. It's the very first one.
right.
It's where you learn everything right off the bat, and then to your point about school, you're shoved out into the world where you find out that there's all these other representatives from all these other organizations, and they ain't running their organization the same way you came out of. And now that's where that's where the friction begins.
Mhm. That's where
Um,
the learning begins.
the
Yeah, I
learning
mean,
begins.
because
That's right.
you'll never stop learning. It's
Right.
just
Yeah,
you could get to a point to where you refuse to learn,
for sure.
um, but that opportunity to learn is never going to go away. It just
Exactly.
depends on the individuals who are in those positions of leadership or in those positions. I mean, it just comes down to, there's a variety of personalities and there's a variety of leadership styles, and it just comes down to human beings. We're
Mhm.
unique, just like
Mhm.
everyone else. So,
So, one other thing in your background that I put a star next to that I want to talk about is well, for both you and I, there was an event that occurred in September of 2001 that sort of shaped our generation. And it ping ponged you in one direction, it ping ponged me in another direction. As a matter of fact, that event, September 11th, occurred literally 13 days before I turned 21. And for me, I've characterized that as literally the beginning of chaos for the last 20 years for me. Like, it's been just nonstop chaos ever since, up until about this point. And I'm comfortable. You talked about the word adaptable. I'm adaptable to chaos. And I think a lot of us who are in this generation are adaptable to chaos because that's all we've ever known. And that, of course, gets back to my thesis that I challenged you with a little bit, floating around in your head there, about the fourth turning and about getting to the end of all this. You were already in service when September 11th happened. Talk with us a little bit about the 2 tours in Iraq, and sort of what were some of the lessons you learned from that? Because previous to that, the last major American deployment to the Middle East was the first Persian Gulf, and that was over in like, I won't say 10 seconds, but I mean, like, I knew people who went there who were older brothers and sisters of
Yeah,
ours, right?
yeah.
And then
Lasted
after
about 3
that,
days.
well, that's
Yeah.
about 3 days, and then they were walking around in, and I'm not, again, I don't want to minimize anybody's service, but they were walking around in Bosnia in the mid 90s. There was some discussion of sending American troops to Rwanda. Bill Clinton could never get the public support for that, so that never got up off the ground. But then, we're right into the biggest deployment, or I shouldn't say the biggest, the most serious deployment of men and material to a place overseas since probably Vietnam, where we actually, as a country, decided via our leaders, our civilian leadership, Donald Rumsfeld and George W. Bush, that, oh, okay, you got all of our attention now. You claimed you wanted it. Now you got it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do the man dance, and the first dance, I guess, is going to be ours. And you were part of that push. You were part of that engagement. So talk with us a little bit about, because again, you were already in the thing. You were already you were already 3 years in the thing when September 11th happened. So how was that for you? How impactful was that for you? How did that shift your thinking about leadership, or maybe even reinforce things that you think about leadership?
So, so at the time, September 11th, I was serving. I was a sergeant, E5, and I was very quickly, I very quickly made E5 once I made my unit. So it kind of turned into, I started off as a PFC in basic training. I had automatic promotion to E4 at 12 months. I was promoted to E5. I was 19 years old. And then a week later, I turned 20. And I'm going to tell you, it is difficult having a safety brief with a team of 6 guys who are all in their mid 20s or late 20s, early 30s. And I'm telling them, all right, guys, no drinking and driving this weekend. Call me if you need me. And they're like, yeah, we'll definitely call you because we know you're going to be sober because you can't even buy alcohol yet. So being a leader of older people was a very difficult and daunting task that I had to deal with. So I very rarely, with new incoming soldiers, would express, let them know what my age was. But I carried myself very maturely because I had to. It was I had the knowledge, and I had the training, and I had the promotion orders. I had the things backing me up saying that, this is who I am. This is what I am. And going, at the time, I was actually the school's NCO for the battalion, and I ran the leadership development course. That was a pre-course to the Warriors Leaders course that they have now. It used to be called the PLDC, or the Primary Leadership Development Course. It was a 30-day lockdown course that you would go into, and in 30 days, you would go in as a specialist E4 promotable, and you would come out as a E5.
Okay.
Most of the time getting promoted as soon as you graduated. So you would leave the unit for 30 days and go, live, train, and learn with a bunch of other E4 promotables by, staff sergeants and sergeant first classes, giving you all the ins and outs on, leadership stuff. There's mostly a heavy focus on land navigation, right? But a lot, everything else is pretty much leadership stuff. That's where you go through, you memorize the NCO creed, you memorize the soldier's creed, you go through, you have check all these boxes, and then you graduate, then you get promoted. So coming back to that, I was currently dropping soldiers off at PLDC. I was waiting, and we get there early, like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, because you've got so many people that have hard slots, but then you got a whole plethora of other people for standby in case someone doesn't pass the weigh-in, or somebody doesn't have all their items, because if you show up and you're missing an item, they nope, you're done, go back to your unit, see you next class, that kind of thing. So I was sitting in my car waiting for my attendees who had already been accepted. They had already passed. I'm just setting with the rest of their gear. waiting on them to come and actually grab their weapon and grab their stuff and go to training, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I had a guy, his name was Staff Sergeant, or it was Sergeant Ryan Austin, comes over, he knocked on the door, and he was there. He wasn't there as a student, I don't believe, but he was there on detail helping me move all the stuff, because it's a big muscle movement to get them over there and get them set up. Comes over, knocks on the window, like, "Hey man, something's happening, turn on the radio." And I was like, what? He's like, "Yeah, some plane hit the trade towers in New York." I was like, "No, man." And I turned on the radio, started listening. I was like, "Oh man, this is not good." With what's going on. And so I didn't actually process what was happening at the moment. I still had tasks at hand. Hey, I still got soldiers that's got to be somewhere, got things going on. I'm just like, everybody, put the blinders on and focus on what you got going on and worry about New York and what's happening later. But the only question came out really quick was, if there's anybody that has anybody or connection to anybody that works or lives in Manhattan, New York, where the World Trade Center was happening on, the command wanted to know, hey, who are the people who are going to be greatly affected by this? Are going to be those who have family relatives that are in that area. So, and it was, for where we were at, I mean, there was a couple of people that, they had, family members that were, either worked in the area or worked in the building or did something like that. So, but going from there, it was pretty much when I got back to the battalion headquarters and walked in, dropped my stuff off on my desk, and I walked around to the CQ where the TV was on, and I looked at the TV and saw the news. I was just like, I looked over at the guy that was sitting on staff duty at the time, and I was just like, you know what this means, right? It's just like, there's like some private, he's like, "Well, I don't know, Sergeant." I was like, "It means we're going to war. What this means." Like, from then it was just pretty much everything changed that day in regards to training, in regards to discipline, in regards to, like, there was no more slaps on the wrist, Article 15s for anything. It was like, if you were going in for an Article 15, you did some heinous something or other, and we're not taking any crap. You got to go, because we're going overseas. This is happening. So my unit, the 51st Signal Battalion, we were slated to support the 22nd Signal Brigade out of the gate. So we rolled into Iraq from Kuwait. I deployed out March of 03. We deployed March of 03. And then within 3 weeks, we headed north and crossed the border from Kuwait to Iraq. And it was a terrible ride, right? Because, I mean, the signal equipment, we got big trucks, and we got we got antennas, we got generators,
you got all that good Cold War. You got all that good Cold War equipment.
We got all that. I mean, and we're rolling through, and we're in our Humvees. There's no up armor or anything. We don't know what that even is at the time. So we've got no doors on, hanging up the side. We got flak jackets on that are basically just, that shrapnel is all they're going to stop. They're not going to stop anything serious. But I mean, we rolled through after I want to say it was 3rd Infantry Division. It could have been 4th Infantry Division, 4th ID or 3rd ID. I can't remember which one, but we rolled through right after they rolled through. And let's just say that they decimated everything. It was just sheer, like, I'd never seen a level of carnage as up at that point. Like, and then that's when it was just like, this is surreal. Like, this is like no other. And then and at the time I was just the E5. I had 5 people on my team. 2 of them were NCOs. I just so happened to outrank them by data rank, so they were just bodies, right? And the equipment that I was on was the remote access unit. So I was in charge of the team that would go out and set up an omnidirectional antenna out, away from everything, in the middle of nowhere. Just put this antenna up that is actually transmitting in all directions, so everyone can have access to this, and they're, so they can make phone calls from their Humvees and stuff. And we rolled that equipment north, and we never set it up. So
Mhm.
from that point, essentially my radio trucks were used to connect node centers to node centers across. So I was actually a part of the 22nd Signal Brigade's historic moment of creating the most or the largest tactical communications network in history in 2003. So I did that job for about 4 months
Mhm.
of just manning radios,
Manning
taking
radio
care of
towers.
soldiers. I spent
Yeah.
my 23rd birthday in a guard tower, on
Yeah.
Overwatch. So it just turned in like it was, you were there, we were soldiering. That's what we were doing.
Mhm.
And everybody, we made the best of what we had.
Mhm.
We had terrible living conditions. Mail was always slow. I mean, it was just the beginning of the war. There was
Right.
dirt floors and winter tents is what we were living in.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was just miserable. So you had to have a certain level of like sense of humor when it
Mhm.
comes to the heat of the day. Yeah, all right, hey man, hey, first sergeant's coming over. Everybody, get your tops on. Look
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
look right. It's like everybody get your stuff together. It's like, hey man, wake him up, man. He's like, get him up, get him up. Because we would just be like, we would be passing out from the heat in the middle of the
Oh
day,
yeah.
just gone. So it kind of turned into that's where we really learned and came together as a team and really built, those bonds that were going to get us through the rest of the deployment. But it was tough. Um, the first two tours, the second tour was not as bad as the first one. It was more infrastructure, better organized, better food, better everything pretty much. And it was like no other, like you go to the field at Fort Bragg, formerly known as Fort Bragg, Fort
Mhm.
Liberty, whatever you want to call it. You go to the field for 2, 3 weeks and live in the woods and play army pretty
Right.
much,
Yeah.
paint the faces up and do all the things. And then you go to Iraq and you're in the desert and it is nothing like what you trained in, right? So you're just like, why are we even doing this garbage back here in the rear? Like, this
Right.
doesn't make any sense. Well, we're doing this and we're deploying to the desert. I mean, this is completely asinine and stupid. And so after, when I joined up, I mean, it turned into the combat recognition and combat patch that came from those deployments, those first deployments, were probably the first one was probably the hardest, right? First,
Mhm.
second, third year ends always because you're establishing everything, standing
Yeah.
everything up. Um, Going back and because I was there from '03 to '04, came home for 9 months, did a bunch of marriage counseling and stuff. I had
Mhm.
some issues on the home front there. Deployed again, came home single. So
Mhm.
the by the time I was by the time I was 25 years of age, I'd been divorced twice, filed bankruptcy once,
Mhm.
and still doing the job and
Yeah.
trying to figure it out. And at the same time, yeah, I was, alcohol was kind of like a crutch. Like
Mhm.
this is kind of like part of the
Yep.
the whole the whole system is, you go out, you're at Fort Bragg, you're running 4 miles every week, you're doing
Mhm.
PT 5, you're doing physical training 5 days a week,
Mhm.
and you're rucking at least 6 to 8 miles a week, and then you've got a 12-mile validation every 3 months. You've got the North Carolina sweltering humidity in the summer that is just astronomical. And by the way, you're going out for, nickel pitcher night at the bar downtown on Bragg Boulevard,
Mhm.
Saturday, Sunday night back to back. And then you're out running 6 miles Monday morning,
Yeah.
down Ardennes with, 82nd Airborne Division and
Yep.
everybody trying to do all their things. So it kind of turned into, after those first two deployments, I was really, it really messed me up. I really came into a place where I was just like, there is no God kind
Mhm.
of mentality. I was very agnostic in everything and was just like, there's no purpose in any of this kind of deal from everything that I'd seen and everything that I'd witnessed and done. It was just like, this doesn't make sense to me. It was very difficult to process, at
Mhm.
25 years of age. And now I'm looking at my son who's 25 and I'm just like, the problems that you have can, in comparison, there is no comparison, but I'm not going to like hold you to the same standard because you didn't have the
Right.
same upbringing that I had. You didn't have
Yeah.
the same experiences that I had. So there's no real comparison. So when you start talking about like that whole ending of the crisis rotation type thing,
Hmm.
yeah, you can see it in the generation of today that that's probably accurate. It's going to be pretty mellow
Hmm.
for, upcoming before it starts getting gnarly again. But that period of time, I really didn't experience growth because I was not focused on development or growth.
Okay.
In fact, I was stagnant at that point.
Yeah.
Because I want to say it was my second tour to Iraq. I was an E5 promotable. I'd been an E5 for about 4.5 years as a sergeant E5. And for 2 of those years I'd been promotable and I just
Hmm.
couldn't make points. I didn't have the civilian education to make the points with the way the rank structure works, with how the promotion system works to make E6. So I'm sitting here looking at like E5P, pretty stagnant. I'm sitting here, and then there's this guy. Oh, his name was Sergeant First Class Letts, and I was at the joint. This is when I was at the end of my second rotation, I think it was. And this guy, Sergeant First Class Letts, he was 82nd Airborne Division signal guy,
Hmm.
and he was the signal liaison for the 82nd Signal Battalion,
Hmm.
supporting the 22nd Signal Brigade. And I was tasked to be the 51st Signal Battalion liaison. So we're all sitting in this big room, and at the end of the night, every night, we're briefing the brigade colonel or the S3, major on what's going on with the network. And this guy, Sergeant Letts, comes over, and I can't even remember what the argument was over, but he came over and he said something. And I was just like, Sergeant, I was like, I know what I'm doing. I've been in
Hmm.
E5 for like 5 years now. And he looked at me, he was just like, that ain't something to brag about, man. Like being in E5 for 5, that isn't something that you should be bragging about. Like what the hell is wrong with you? Like, why would you think that that's okay? That doesn't make me feel any better about this conversation. Like, and I'm just like not even processing what he's saying as far as like, what are you talking
Hmm.
about? So, but then it dawned on me later
Hmm.
whenever I actually was leaving that position and we was getting replaced with another unit that came in. That's whenever uh, he came over. He said, "Hey, man, you've got a lot of potential.
Hmm.
You have unlimited potential with what you have already. You need to." He was basically the ones like, "You need to get away from this
Hmm.
signal stuff, and you need
Hmm.
to go across the street, and you need to go do something with the
Something
special
else.
ops guy."
Yeah.
So, and it was basically just like, he's like, there's no reason that you should be in E5 for 5 years. He's just
Right.
like, you're right. You know exactly what you're doing, and you're up here. And at the time, man, I'm at the liaison. I'm like with the Joint Networking Operations Center,
Hmm.
22nd Signal Brigade running, and every battalion attached under that brigade that they have command and control over, operational
Hmm.
command and control over. I mean, there was like 15 different battalions, and every single, like, there were captains that were setting as liaisons next to me, right?
Hmm.
There were sergeant first classes and master sergeants. We're talking like E8, E7, O3 level ranking guy. I'm the lowest ranking
You're the
liaison
lowest ranking
there,
guy. Yeah.
and I'm an E5, and I'm just like, and going up and briefing the brigade colonel like it's nothing. But the
Right.
first couple of briefings I had that I had to get through, I was really like hesitant on what it was, but I had some great mentorship there that basically was like, hey man, here's how you brief. Here's what you need to focus on. Let me see your slides. Okay, this is what you're going to show them. This is what you're going to say. This is what you're going to show them. This is what you're going to say. This is what you're going to show them. This is what you're going to say. Ask any questions. If they ask any questions, just say, sir, I don't know, but I'll get back to you as soon as I get back from my S3. And then you go and you send that question to your S3, and then you report
Right.
back to it via email. Just basically, I had Sergeant First Class that dude really set me straight.
Yeah.
So there are people like that in that early years that really set up my success for advancement later because they got me out of the wrong mindset, right? So
Bingo, bingo. And that's something that I think, and again, this is sort of an offshoot of the young men, kind of commentary or comment that I had before to set up my previous question, but it does sort of relate to this for young people in general. I think that every young person, and I've had experiences in my life where, particularly in my 20s, where I was stagnating, just like you were, and somebody came along and said, "You're wasting your time here. You need to do something else."
yeah,
And I looked around just like you did. I looked around and went, "You're talking to me? What?" Like, who? I can sometimes joke with my kids, you know. And that it's like in the Jay-Z song, the Jay-Z rap song, that moment of clarity, right? Jay-Z raps, "Thank God for granting me this moment of clarity, this moment of honesty." And it is that moment of clarity that I think really people need in their 20s. And I think both young men and young women need it. You need it less so in your 30s. If you're looking for a moment of clarity in your 40s, right, that's not a good look.
that's what they call that midlife crisis.
That's a midlife crisis, right? Exactly.
Starting over at 40 is it can be done, but it is not comfortable.
It is
normally
rough.
something that it's going to be a rough deal, and that's what I see on a regular basis. Doing what I'm doing now is
right, and so that's where we're pulling this now. Exactly. So, I also believe that folks in their 20s, and you kind of talked about this too when you talked about alcohol as a crutch, you're going to have, and then I found this in my life, and when we talk with other folks on the podcast about this as well, you're going to have a Johnny Cash get tough or die moment. Like, you either have to figure it out or you're going to fall off the table, and that's it. I had my moment in, the upper Midwest, in a little town you never heard of, walking back home drunk in the middle of winter when it was like, 12 below. And I was ill dressed for the weather. You're either going to get tough or you're going to die. Like, those are your only two options at that point. But I think those kinds of moments sit with people, and they do become the fundamental foundational moments that allow you to then, you use the word mentor and coach others later on, because you could speak from those experiences and pull from those experiences. And so I want to talk about that, because you said the core of what you're doing with Pecan Valley Centers is reducing veteran suicide rates and trying to bring that down and try to work with folks that are impacted by this phenomenon. And the types of things that you have experienced allow you to speak into those folks' lives with A, credibility, and B, also a genuine sense of care. And I don't mean care in terms of a feminist ethic of care or some like scholarly idea of care. I mean, what I call hard-headed empathy, right? Because you could talk with them from a hard-headed position, and you can say, yeah, I've been down the road that you've been down, and I know what the clearing at the end of that path is, and you know what the clearing at the end of that path is. And so let's have a credible, no BS conversation here, because you could BS everybody else, but you can't BS me. Now, that approach works a couple of different ways. It works if you could pull it off because you genuinely have had those experiences, which you have had. Or it works if you could pull it off where maybe you haven't had those experiences, but you have enough, to your point about authoritarianism, or lack of adaptability, you have enough moral authority. That's something we talk about on this podcast, moral and ethical authority, to be able to pull that off, right? And it's either going to be one of those two approaches. Anything outside of those two, either experience or moral authority, isn't going to get you there. And so priests and pastors and counselors, they have that moral authority, even though they may not have the experiences, right? They just have that authority because of the weight we give those positions in our culture. You're coming out of that authority, or you're getting that authority from experience. So talk with us a little bit about working with the veterans, What do you see inside of? Well, let's make this very, very tiny to start with, and then we can sort of blossom out from there. What are the drivers for pushing veterans towards that clearing at the end of the path of suicide? What are the drivers towards that? I mean, you mentioned in your own life, being twice divorced, alcohol, those types of things,
Oh, yeah,
financial issues, all of those kinds of things. The common things that we sort of think of are those the main drivers, or is it something else that we're not aware of? Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
So it comes down to when you really, the fundamentals of just individuals who die by suicide. If you look into what they were doing right up until, or what was going on right before, you're most likely you're going to see signs, you're going to see things, they're either going to say or do something that is going to lead to that outreach of help, right? Unless they are like just dead set on, they put a mark on the calendar and say, you know what, that's the day when it gets here, I've made a decision and I'm going to stick to it. And they just live until that day and they don't show any signs or symptoms. They just accept, right? So normally that's not the case. Normally it's a manifestation of a fleeting thought that is just the right moment, right time, where they actually have access and to little to no barriers or mitigations to a lethal means, right? And it just ends up being what was most of the time probably meant to be an attempt or an outreach to cry, just it becomes lethal, right? So I mean, 70% of suicide deaths are via firearms, right? But you have way more attempts with other means, such as sharp objects or overdoses, pills, ingesting poisons or medications and stuff like that. Where it comes down to, those are just, it's not that I don't believe that it has anything to do with they just had more time or more or less, or that time was of the essence kind of thing. I think it really just comes down to just that access to that lethal means in that moment, right? So it comes down to that understanding, and that's one of the things that I'm a certified instructor on, is counseling on access to those lethal means, so that when I'm dealing with a veteran who is experiencing some kind of depression, anxiety, or combating post-traumatic stress disorder or something like that, where they're in that hazard moment, that's when you turn to those closest to them and say, okay, where all the firearms are, go get them. Let's remove those from the equation. Let's put time and distance between them, so that this moment will pass, right? So it's calculated right now, the average is about 10 minutes. 10 minutes from the time the fleeting thought arrives to execution of the suicide. That every minute beyond 10 minutes increases the likelihood of survivability by like 35% per minute. beyond
Okay.
10 minutes. So
Okay.
really getting into that time crunch is like, that's why it's so important that we get the veterans out there to know, hey, if you're having those thoughts, those fleeting thoughts, this is who you need to call. This is what you need to call. And that, 988 and press 1 is the National Suicide Hotline. And there's mobile crisis outreach teams at all the local mental health authorities across Texas, So, I mean, there are organizations and mitigations in place, but it just comes down to educating the veterans, the families, and the service members on what those things are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then getting them that understanding of, well, yeah, I mean, if your veteran is talking to you about, they're not feeling very good today, and they don't really feel like, they start making comments along the lines of they want to go to sleep and not wake up. That those are like telltale signs that you may want to go ahead and start removing medications, uh, you know, sharp objects or firearms out of the vicinity and put them under lock and key somewhere where they're going to have to, time and distance
At a
between those.
distance. Yeah.
Right. So, but if you don't educate the family on that kind of stuff beforehand, they see that they're going to, no one's going to think, oh, they would never do something like that. Right. So it just turns into, there's a lot of preparation and thought that can go into what can be done beforehand to mitigate something that could be a potential threat. In
Okay.
regards to it.
Let me ask you a question. So very often in these types of conversations, people will say, particularly civilians will say, we seemed to not have this problem with World War II vets. We seem to not have this problem with Korean War vets. We seem to not have, right? And I'm just setting up the question. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm saying this is the question that is often posed, right? I'm merely standing in because you got to bring in other people, right? With other thoughts.
Right.
We seem to not have had this real challenge until Vietnam. Is there something in the social culture that broke since World War II, or has this always been? You mentioned PTSD. Has this always been an issue, and we're just better at catching it now?
I want to say that we have defined mental health a lot, like just the way that psychology and psychiatry and mental health in general over the last 20, 40 years, the improvements and advancements and understanding of those different types of what are they called? There's like 7 different parts of self. Like intelligence, emotional quotient, those different levels of whatever. So, but being able to break down and understand, and having a mental health professional that is trained and understanding in those different domains, that's what they're called, those different domains, in order to better understand and guide the individual into understanding of what they're dealing with, and that what they're dealing with is manageable and treatable, and it's not something that they have to continue to suffer from by themselves, right? That there are other things that an individual can do in order to overcome those types of mental health challenges. Now, but yeah, I mean, World War II, Korean War, I'm not going to say that they didn't have their own mental health issues coming back from those periods of time, but I mean, it was a different generation. I mean, you had the Great Depression that led into, World War II. So you want to talk about tough times, those individuals were already hard, right? Iron sharpens iron when it comes down to it. And you're dealing with a generation that is, Cabbage Patch Kids and GI Joes and, carnivals on the weekends and whatever. And now you're having a different type of life. And then you're going in and you're witnessing and experiencing traumas at such a depth that you'd only seen in movies, knowing it was fake.
Right.
But it's in front of you, and this is not fake.
This is not fake.
This is very real, very like it is a different level that an individual steps into when they go from watching a movie like Rambo to going over and actually seeing what war really looks like. And I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you, it's not always bodies and burning bodies and that stuff. No, most time you're looking at just like 15 to 20 emaciated children that are barely clothed,
Yeah.
that are just filthy head to toe, that are just out with their hands out, just sir,
Hmm.
sir, food, food. They're just, and it's just, those are the kinds of things that just witnessing and seeing, you're just like, man, this is a bad way. And then you come back to the first world and you're just like, where's the TV remote?
Right.
I can't find the TV remote. Where's it? Man, first world problems, man. You got kids on the other side of the country, on the other side of the world, that don't have water to drink, and you're worried
Right.
about where your damn TV remote is
Well,
for
and
your
this is
bedroom.
the
Right?
disconnect, and I'm glad you brought this up because you're right. Like, my grandfather and my grandfather on my mother's side served in World War II, and then I had a bunch of uncles and who served in Korea, a bunch of them, and then by the time Vietnam came around, my father was a Vietnam vet, right? And one of the things I push back on when people say, well, what is this? Is this a new thing? Like, no, but no, it's not a new thing because the human brain is the same as it's been for a while now, at least 10,000 years. If you want to go by that factoring of time. Um, and so we've been dealing emotionally with trauma, to your point, pretty much the same. Our understanding of that has gotten better. The difference between 80 years ago and now is, to your point, yeah, those guys were tough. I mean, look, I remember my grandmother telling me stories of her father, having to, she was a sharecropper's daughter, one of like 12 kids, right? Having to, get on a train and go get a job somewhere that picking cotton, right? And that job wasn't available because he was in the South and he was African American. So that job wasn't available. And then getting back on the train and coming back home and having to eat his shoes coming back home. Now, that's what my grandmother's generation, who was the generation that went and fought in World War II, was raised with.
Yeah.
That kind of poverty is something that we can't even comprehend, even with everything going on right now in our culture, that kind of chaos that we have, the moral, social, political chaos. We still can't comprehend that kind of poverty. We just can't. We wouldn't even tolerate it now. There'd be riots in the street if you had that kind of poverty. Well, a person coming out of that is, quite frankly, to your point, like you said, iron sharpens iron, going to look at, oh, wait, all I got to do is go to Germany or go to Japan and kill a bunch of people. And you're going to give me 3 hots in a cot. Where do I sign up? How hard is this going to be? And, we've talked about Peleliu and Okinawa on this podcast. We've talked about not only the invasion of Normandy, but we've talked about the Battle of the Bulge. We've talked about, like I mentioned before, Colonel David Hackworth and his experiences in the Korean War. We've talked about Vietnam, and we've talked about the Persian Gulf War. And as the generations have gone on, that hardening, I think, of the mind, to your point, has shifted in America. And I also think the knock-on effect of us understanding PTSD and mental health that came out of how Vietnam veterans were treated, the sort of opposite effect of that is whack-a-mole, right? So Vietnam veterans are treated in one way, and that was the whack, but then the mole popped up in a different spot. And so I think that civilians like myself and folks who have not had those experiences are extremely careful now to disintermediate the soldier from the policy. We're very careful to do that, I think. And we do it naturally now. We now have 2 generations of people that just do that naturally. They don't even, well, I think we're crossing the Rubicon back in some sort of ways, back to uniting those 2 things together, which I think is dangerous. But I think for a while we separated the soldier from the policy. Like, George Bush is over here, to paraphrase from Andrew Jackson. George Bush made his thing, and then this person had to go deal with it, and we could go deal with this person without having to talk about George Bush. We don't have to talk about him at all. We can just go deal with this person that had to deal with the thing. And I think that that's an interesting switch in our society and culture around mental health, but also around PTSD and how we deal with these areas. You talked about the impact of sort of the ways in which time and distance sort of set up for people, what they will do. And you said any minute over 10 minutes increases, you said, we said 30% an increase in survivability. What are if someone's listening to this, and they maybe don't know anything about Pecan Valley, they don't know anything about what you do, this is the first time they're hearing about this, maybe they've got somebody in their house, or they've got somebody in their life, they've seen some weird things. What are the signs along that path that they need to be paying attention to, that are just common, right? That they would just need to know?
We're talking about for an individual who may experience a suicidal ideation, or someone who may be close to someone who's going to be experiencing suicidal ideation.
Okay, that's a great distinction with a difference, I think, for both of those, who close to and maybe on the path to.
So normally, and from what I've grown to learn over the years, I have had a handful of individuals. I couldn't count them on one hand, the number of people that I know who were either service members or veterans who died by suicide. It really comes down to paying attention to the individual and where they're at and what they're doing. But normally what ends up happening that leads to that kind of behavior of, I'm gonna just end it, right? Just F it. I'm just gonna just go.
Yep.
Normally there is some kind of breakdown of a relationship somewhere.
Okay.
Right. So they don't just be like, oh, my life's terrible, I'm just going to go do this today. No, normally it's because there is a network of support that is no longer there. Right. Okay. So there was something that they were tethered onto, that they were leaning on, and it could be, a marriage. It could be, loss of a child. It could be a number of things, right? But normally there's some significant loss of something, be it a relationship, or be it self-value, like individual. I'm going to go and tell you, my biggest and hardest period of time in the military was during transition from military back into the civilian side. Now, and I'm going to go and invite you. We do. The Texas Veterans Commission has a course that is about 3.5 hours long. It's called Military Cultural Competency, that I teach at least once a month in Granbury. And I'd like to invite you to come and sit in on that, so you can get some more clarity on, military culture from start to finish, because it's a very broad stroke of everything that an individual goes through from the day that they sign their contract all the way to the day that they're applying for VA benefits. A very, very quick, down and dirty, broad stroke. And it's normally about 2.5, 3 hours long. It used to be 8 hours, but it's been condensed to make it a little bit more palatable for people who have no military background whatsoever. And it's normally starts with, who here has got military experience personally, who has military parents, who has military cousins, family, distant family members, those kinds of things. And it's trying to draw on some of the military experience they have. But for my darkest time, when it was during transition, when I went from having value and purpose, doing a job, to all of a sudden no purpose anymore. Right. So, and it basically, and that's just my own personal side of it, because I ended up I was very upset with how my transition went when it occurred, because I was actually trying to develop and grow. I found out that at 18.5 years of military service, that I actually possess a medical birth defect, unbeknownst to me, that I should have never been allowed to join the military.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, not that I'm missing a kidney or anything, but it's on that level.
Sure.
Right. But if it had been caught during my in processing, they would have been like, nope, you got to go, because you can't do this. And and it took about, and the reason why I say 18 and a half is because at 18 years, I had developed an issue that I went to the doc about. And he's like, we don't know what this is.
Hmm.
We're going to send you over to general surgery. They sent me to dermatology. Dermatology sent me back to general surgery, sent me to cardiovascular. Cardiovascular is like, oh, I think I know what this is, but I'm not the guy to really diagnose it. You need to go talk to a vascular surgeon.
Hmm.
So I went and I talked to a guy, and he's pretty much like, hey man, what's going on? I said, well, I just need you to sign off on this so that I can go to SEER school so that I
Hmm.
can get promoted next year to sergeant major, because I'm trying to advance my career, right? I was a first sergeant trying to make the next grade, and the only school that I did not have, and the only experience I did not have, was SEER school, which is
Hmm.
essentially, that's the POW Camp Slappy training, where you go through the what happens if you, how do you do a respond, or what goes through when you do POW training. I don't know what goes on there because I didn't actually get to go.
Right.
Right? Because I found the doc said, well, I got some good news and bad news. Good news is you're going to retire at 20 years. And I was just like, that's the good news. What's the bad news? He's
What's the
like,
bad
well,
news?
bad news is you cannot jump out of airplanes anymore. You can't wear body armor anymore. You can't shoot a rifle in your shoulder anymore. You can't do combatives anymore. You really need to stop lifting heavy weights, like specifically no more push-ups, no more bench press, no more
Wow.
anything like that. Then I was just like, are you serious? What? I was like, what are you, that can't be the deal with
Right.
what he's like. Well, so I got diagnosed with what I thought was a birthmark on my chest that kind of looks like varicose veins. I got diagnosed at 18 and a half years with what's called an AVM. It's a arterial venous malformation. So this
Okay.
venous malformation, it's essentially the varicose veins, and
Hmm.
normally they're just venous malformations.
Yeah.
Mine is unique because it's on my trunk, like
Hmm.
specifically it's on my right pec,
Yep.
and it's being fed by an artery.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay.
if I'd gotten hit in the chest too hard, or if I got, an opening shock with how the parachute harness comes down and it's like
Hmm.
right over it, and the rucksack straps come in, the pocket of the shoulder with the M4, the 240, or whatever I'm shooting. I mean, if I had ruptured that feeding vein to this
Hmm.
AVM, which is literally like just under the skin, like it
Hmm.
just barely pops out under my pec muscle. It's just like if you had ruptured that artery during any of these activities over the last 18 and a half years, you would potentially bleed out internally in minutes. And so that's when my darkest days kind of fell on me. So I was like, well, I think I've cheated death enough. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to go ahead and retire. So,
Right.
but being told that you can't jump out of airplanes anymore when you're a jump master in an airborne unit. If you can't jump, you can't jump master. If you can't jump master, you can't lead paratroopers. So it kind
Right.
of, basically I had to roll it in. So that was when I went from having growth and development and a plan, and I was gonna make sergeant major, and I was gonna stay in 26, 27 years, and I was gonna retire between 27 and 30 years of service, depending on how high up I got. um went to being, bye,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
done with you. Like, here's your retirement check, here's your
Right.
VA benefits, go have a good life, do whatever. And I'm just like, what do I do now? I don't know what to
Right.
do. Like, what can I do? So it just really, it was a hard transition for me, seeing that I wasn't ready to take a knee, face out, and drink water, and then find something else. I was pretty much retired. I did
Hmm.
not choose it, other than if I continued to do it, I was going to be riding a desk up at
Right.
up at First Special Forces Command,
Hmm.
doing school as NCO or something. Like, this is just something that was not fulfilling, right? So
Hmm.
um I think it really comes down to like that thought of, well, my life is over, right? Because I'm transitioning and I don't have a plan. I don't know. It's basically the unknown is in front of me. When you get the rug pulled out from underneath you, and what you thought was going to happen is no longer plausible or going to happen. When things change abruptly, and you don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. You pretty much are just like, okay, well, screw it. Now, what do I do?
Right.
So I turned to alcohol heavily,
Hmm.
and that's what I turned to for a number of years until, I was seeing therapists. I was, on antidepressants and medications. And I went through like 3 different therapists and probably 4 different medications. And I've been sober now for 2 years and some change. February 27th, 2022, I gave up alcohol. I gave up social media. I gave up caffeine. I gave up a whole bunch of things all at once just to start over and hit reset.
Yep.
So, and it was probably the best decision that I ever made, was putting down alcohol and just turning that off, because that allowed me to actually deal with the traumas that I have, right?
Right.
And not just the military ones, but all the way back to childhood traumas, every bit of
Sure.
it. So, and I probably have had more growth and development in the last 2 years that I've been sober than I had in the previous 20
Yep.
in the military, just because of clarity of mind and
Yep.
and having that, and doing a job like what I'm doing now. It comes down to, I really love what I'm doing. I
Yeah.
really do have a passion for what I'm doing. And I feel like, it's like my calling, kind of like, this is what I'm called to do,
Hmm.
because I can actually, I'm good at it. Right.
Hmm.
So it just turns into one of my, when I left service, I was given, I had a guy that hired me on. He was a guy that started his own VA claims consulting firm, for profit, which we'll get into later. I don't recommend anybody go and use a for-profit company at all. There are plenty of free services out there, but you can, talk about that another day. It just kind of turns into, this guy was retired, officer, lieutenant colonel, and he basically said that probably the best advice that I ever heard in regards to transition, that really got me focused on, stop dwelling in the darkness of, you no longer have purpose, or your vision is completely gone, of what you wanted to do. Just get a new vision. And it was basically, when you transition out and the military is done with you, I don't care what branch you're in, and this is something I would tell to any single service member that's currently serving active duty, or reservist, or National Guard, was, that machine is going to continue to run after you're gone without issue. It is bigger than you are, and it does not need you as bad as you think it needs you. So when you do decide to transition, you're going to have 3 options to pick from. And you pick 2 that you want, and just know you're going to get the opposite of the third, and be satisfied with it. Right.
Hmm.
So those 3 options are location, job satisfaction, or money. So you work where you want to work and live where you want to live, doing a job you love, you're going to get paid garbage money. Right.
Hmm.
But if you want to do a job you love and make the money you want to make, you're going to do it in a place you don't want to be. Right. So it just comes down to, you pick the 2 that you want, you get the opposite of the third. And it really just comes down to, when doing what I'm doing, I'm living where I want to live. I'm in the hill country of Texas, just a little bit south of Granbury, beautiful town, dinosaur capital
Hmm.
of Texas, Glen Rose. And it's beautiful here. So this is where I want to be. Right.
Yeah.
This is the kind of atmosphere that I want to raise my kids in. Right.
Right.
Small town, great school district, great community, great weather, and great people. Right.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then the job that I'm doing is by far probably the best job that I've ever found. Right. Just
Hmm.
being able to impact so many different people towards goodness. Right. Because
Hmm.
that's really what I'm doing, is I'm taking these veterans who are in a despair and turmoil, and I'm providing them access into resources that are going to mitigate and allow them to recover and recoup and regain control over, their future again, be it
Hmm.
through healthcare benefits, or education benefits, or disability benefits, or mental health, access to good mental health treatments, just those things that I can, and that I do way more than just that. I mean, there are
Mhm.
several other categories that I cover, but um, just being that person that is the go-to to take care of somebody who I identify with.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
So this comes down, it's like I said, I'm teach, coach, and mentor veterans, service members, and families like I did my own soldiers.
Right.
So it's
Right.
just basically get them where they need to go. But that transition piece is really what I think most people come out of the military. If they don't have a plan and it
Mhm.
turns into loss of something,
Mhm.
normally starts pushing them towards what is called coping mechanisms. Could be anything from alcohol to drugs to risky behaviors to whatever. Could be a
Mhm.
number of different things that they do in order to um, fill the void, is what I like to
Mhm.
call it. Hey, what are you filling the void with that you have inside? Like, you got to
Right.
find something healthy to fill that void with. Well, doing this job is what's filling that void for me.
Right.
So
Right.
that's why I enjoy doing it as much. Um,
So that reflects something that not only have I heard before, but that I know just from even working with individuals that I've worked with. When I coach, in my consultancy, we coach the much put upon middle manager, and when they lose purpose, when they lose mission, when they lose the vision, or when that's no longer articulated for them, then there is a long decline, a long drop, and then failures of leadership begin to compound, and then it becomes a whole mess, right? The whole dominoes begin to fall, and sometimes even those dominoes fall into their personal lives. Um, that idea of having a mission, that idea of having a purpose is, I want to turn the corner here as we get ready to close. And I want to talk about, leadership. And I want to talk about sort of how you see how for you, leadership linked into that purpose and mission. Now, that's clearly something you've been doing and studying and thinking about for a long, long time. But now it's become closer to the core of your purpose and your mission. So talk with us a little bit about how that happened, and here's and we're book podcast, so I'm gonna ask you the book question too. I'm gonna wrap it into this as well. But what are some books you would recommend for folks to read that are your favorite books that are around leadership?
okay. Hmm. Two parts on that one.
Yeah,
So I'll answer the book question second,
yeah, yeah.
because I can go in depth on it. Okay, so the first part being from a leadership perspective, um, and doing what I'm doing and how it kind of translates over. So here's the deal: I have 27,000 plus veterans in my 6 counties that I cover.
Mm-hmm.
That's estimated roundabout plus or minus 1,000, 27,000.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Knowing what I know from networks and my work in civil affairs and doing counterterrorism operations and humanitarian assistance over in the Philippines, my ultimate job there was mapping the human terrain.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who's who? Who's in power? Where are the vacuums? Where's the nepotism? Who's the behind the scenes power broker? This and that. So I've essentially taken what I did while I was in the military and I've applied it to my 6 counties. And now here's the deal: I don't need 27,000 veterans to know who I am or where I am,
Right,
because 27,000 probably aren't going to need me.
right.
That one or 2% of the veterans who are struggling are probably going to be the ones that are needing me. So
Mm-hmm.
I focus on the community leadership, like those individuals within the community who are faith-based leaders, business owners, council members, first responders. Those types of individuals are the ones that I go and I meet with and I shake hands with. I give business cards. I build relationships with those individuals. That's why you see
Okay.
me at the. That's why you see me at the Friday events for the
Sure.
Chamber of Commerce type stuff. And I do that across 6 counties, right? So
Right.
it just comes down to, I don't need 27,000 people to know who I am. I need those
Right.
250 specific individuals in positions of leadership that the veteran is going to turn to in a time of crisis to know who I am so that they can pass them to me, because
Okay.
I'm going to solve the problem.
Right.
right? So it just turns in, and then at the end of the day, I'm not even really the one that's solving the problem. I'm the one that knows where I hold all of the keys to all the doors to walk them down the hall to say, what are you looking for? Education.
Hmm.
All right, come on, this is door number 3. Let's go on down a couple more. Okay, here, do, do, do. Hey, all right, what else do you need? Oh, okay, you need access to healthcare. Okay, cool. Let's go on down. We're gonna knock on HMR. We're gonna knock on DA. We're gonna go down
Hmm.
and talk to, wherever we got to go. So it just turns into my leadership style, and what I did in being the face and the handshake of special operations really put me in a position to build those relationships within my community, to
Hmm.
establish, maintain, and grow my network so that I can be the one that they're calling when it's, to mitigate that crisis that veteran has. And I mean, I've done
Yep.
everything from I've connected a surviving spouse to a nonprofit in Crowley that put a $30,000 roof on her home that was like completely dilapidated, right? And
Right.
then all the way to, I'm building a ramp tomorrow for a veteran on hospice that's got 6 to 12 months to live. I'm putting a small porch and a deck, a small deck and a ramp for him and his wife so that she can just take him outside for fresh air on nice days. So it
Hmm.
just really comes down. There's a plethora of things that I have available to do, and I don't do it all myself. That's never the case. It's
Hmm.
always partnership. It's always enterprise. It's always, bringing those entities together through the what do you call it, deliberate intent,
Hmm.
like leadership approach, right? Hey,
Yep.
I'm here. I always introduce myself as, hey, I am your veteran peer service coordinator certified by the Texas Veterans Commission. How can I help you today? Like,
Yep.
I belong to you. Like, not, I'm not part of a system,
Right.
right? So I'm just another gear in the machine to kind of help you get to where you need to go. So as far as books go, I hope that answered question number 1 for you fairly well. So, and I know we're getting to the end here. As far as some books, when in regards to leadership, I would say that some ones that I've read multiple times. A couple of them were recommended by mentors of mine, and then
Hmm.
the one of them recommended by my wife to help
Hmm.
me, that I've read in just last year. I would say Mindset by
Hmm.
Dr. Carol DeWick. Uh,
Yep.
Really good book with, if you want to expand your understanding of why people continue to do the same thing over and over again and never move past. They're just stagnant. You really got to go and get that book. It is on audiobook. Most of the
Hmm.
books I do are audiobook because I drive all day and I listen to them in the car.
Yep.
So um, so it turns into, yeah, the Mindset's a good one by Dr. Carol DeWick. Another one that I've read, I read it probably once a year, every year, because there's always a new edition coming out. Is a book called Influence.
Ah, yes.
Yeah,
The psychology of persuasion. Yes.
there you go. By Dr. Robert Cialdini. That book. Well, I read it for the first time as a staff sergeant on a CA team before my first deployment to the Philippines.
Hmm.
And I'm going to tell you that book was money in the bank when it came to what I was doing on those islands over in the southern Philippines, on leveraging influence within, that network of people, and
Hmm.
how to actually, because I mean, my job was essentially, complete my mission and intent, my commander's mission intent, and get as much as I could with giving it the least amount possible uh, into these regions. And I mean, we spent a lot of money in the Philippines too. I mean, most of it was USAID money, but we
Hmm.
did spend, taxpayer money, building schools, roads, hospitals, those kinds of things. But uh, money is a good motivator for a lot of folks, but that's not always what it is, because
Nope.
just they don't take money from just anybody. They don't like you. If you're not one of them, then they're not going to be wanting to be part of it. But it just comes down to influence was a good one. Another one that's a small read that's real recent that I've just picked up probably about 6 months ago. Small little book. I picked it up at Walmart on like one of those where you can go and you pick up the Bibles
Oh yeah.
over in the book aisle. It's a book called How to Deal with Toxic People
Mm-hmm.
by Gregory L. Jantz, the Dr. Jantz, and is also co-authored with Keith Wall. But this really helped me understand some of the people that I've had in my life that I thought were like some of my biggest supporters, which actually in the end they were not.
Mm-hmm.
But how to deal with toxic people if you are in a subordinate, if you're a subordinate and you are dealing with what seems to just be absolute horrible people, read that book and get some perspective on how to deal with them. Right. And it comes not just, and it's not just for like work related. So I was talking about like
Mm-hmm.
relationships, right? Like how to
Yeah.
deal with toxic people in relationships, and how to deal with the different types of personalities that are toxic and being able to identify those things where, for anything from gaslighting to, drama queen, crisis
Mm-hmm.
king type scenario stuff. So it just comes down to those books are really good. Some fun reads, some ones that I haven't picked up in a while, but I probably need to revisit. Um, was it Mark Munson, Subtle Art of Not Giving a F is a pretty
Yes.
decent one.
Yes.
That one will kind of give you it'll help you count your spoons because
Mm-hmm.
if you're familiar with spoons, like I only got so many spoons in a day to use, and if I use this spoon, I can't do nothing else. It's pretty much the same principle. Be very careful on what you pay attention to and how you do, because the important things, what you might think is important might not be what's really important.
Might not be what's really
And
important. Yeah.
it just helps you focus a little bit on what your priorities are and figure that stuff
Mm-hmm.
out. Some other books that are pretty good reads from the material from the military side of it. Book called Spare Parts is pretty good. It's by Buzz, first name Buzz. See where it is. Can't read that, but Williams.
Buzz Williams.
That's
Okay.
Buzz Williams. He's a Marine, and it's his story from going from Marine reserves of first Gulf War all the way
Mm-hmm.
through his career, prefacing his older brother who he idolized, who died in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good one. It's got some tough stuff in it, and then probably one of the best ones that I've read, just because I'm involved in it, is a book called The Brave Ones by Michael McLeod.
Okay.
And it is actually a story. So Mike McLeod was a 43, 42-year-old professor that joined the Army to gain perspective to write a book. And he was a photographer and a journalist in our public affairs office when I was in 82nd Airborne Division in their special annex as the S9 NCOIC. Mike Sergeant McLeod was probably one of the most physically fit individuals that I had seen in a long time at his age. Like this dude without PT, just a lot of folks. But he's also got tremendous accolades from his photography.
Mm-hmm.
But the book is from his entry into basic training all the way through preparing for deployment into Afghanistan, the experiences that he had with 1st Brigade, with 1st Battalion, 2nd Battalion, 504th. It really goes in, and it's tough to read.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of what he's there, I was there for. So it comes
Mm-hmm.
into a lot of what he did and how he did it. But yeah, that's a good one to pick up, just to get a perspective of not the leadership side of it,
Mm-hmm.
but from the subordinate side of, like, the soldiering side of it, and their perspective of the leadership
Of the
and
leadership.
what happened. So it really, because I mean, you can read a book all day long from numerous leaders that are going to talk about the decorum and the, the elegance of, being in that elevated position, looking down at the troops marching along. But you don't ever get to read about the 5-hour journey it took to get to that 2-minute walk in front of the leader. Right. Because it starts at 2 a.m. with weapons draw. And then, you got to think, if you got 130, 140 paratroopers who draw out weapons, and it takes 2 minutes to put one in, that mission lasts 2 hours, 3 hours just to turn in weapons, and it doesn't matter. I mean, and it just comes down like the way that he writes about the experience from the lower level dealing with, that leadership. And you got to think, man, we had great leadership over in First Brigade. There was a lot of really awesome generals that came out of commanding First Brigade 82nd. General Petraeus, McChrystal. There was a number of guys that started off at brigade command at 82nd Airborne Division, First Brigade. So just the history and the lineage of that alone. And then you go in and you read about how his perceptions were as a young E5, or I should say as a mature E5, because I mean he garnered a lot of respect from the senior leadership because he was their age, and he was also equally educated at he could have easily had gone to officer candidacy school and become a lieutenant and probably blow past all of the individuals there. But I mean, that guy was really, really awesome. He was probably one of the best paratroopers that I had the pleasure to serve with.
Awesome. Well, that is a heck of a list, and we will have that list in the show notes with links to those books below this episode of the podcast. And you can catch that in any player that you listen to this podcast on. Before I let Calen go today, and I want to thank him for being on the podcast, I want to ask him the final question of today. What would you like to promote today, if anything?
So it really comes down to veterans in crisis, right? You got service members, you got veterans, you got families. When it comes to mental health, really want to say, if you're specifically in Texas, right? Every state has their own Veterans Affairs State Department. The Texas Veterans Commission is the one from Texas. The VA has resources available concerning mental health, regardless of your discharge type. If you're in crisis, you can go to any VA or ER and get immediate crisis intervention for mental health. All you do is go and say, I'm having a mental health crisis. This is what I'm feeling. And I'm a veteran. It does not matter what your discharge type is. They will treat you, right? There's a lot of stigma that comes with the individuals who have other than honorable, dishonorable, or bad conduct discharges who think, they don't get normal VA benefits. That's correct. But they do get mental health crisis intervention benefits from the VA regardless. So that is always an option. Local mental health authorities across the state of Texas, 37 that covers every single county, all 254 in the state of Texas. There is a peer service coordinator that is aligned with every single local mental health authority. There's a total of about 52 of us, and we all have volunteers that are part of what is known as the Military Veteran Peer Network. So if you want to learn more on how to get involved with taking care of veterans, and that's veterans of all ages, all branches, as long as they're in Texas. I mean, I talk to veterans who are not in Texas because they give my card to their relatives up in Kansas or Colorado, and they call me. I still set them in the right direction for what they need, but it just really comes down to, if there's a veteran in crisis, get them the necessary stuff that they need, and you can find it at the Veterans Mental Health Department through the Texas Veterans Commission. You go to the TVC website. You can pretty much go on Google and just type in TVC and it should pop up. Go to mental health, and that's basically where it starts. But that's too much for you. You can go on Veterans Mental Health Department and type in Military Veteran Peer Network, go straight to the main page, and there's a nice easy map there. You can type in your county and it'll bring up the name, phone number, email, and address for the peer service coordinator that covers the area that you're in. It's not hard to find one of us. It's that's what we're there for. We are here to take care of veterans, families, and service members to get them the resources they need to begin to live a life of joy and happiness, get out of the turmoil and despair, and come over and actually have a fulfilling life of happiness, right? That's really what the goal is. I think that's important for them to know is there are options and they can come on over and get the help they need.
Awesome. And we will have links to those websites. We will have links to the Military Veteran Peer Network. And we will have links, of course, to the Veterans Crisis Hotline that Calen mentioned previously. And of course, we encourage any one of our listeners or the friends or spouses or relatives of any of our listeners, if you know a veteran in crisis, even in your neighborhood, right? Please encourage them to reach out to folks like Calen and get in touch with the Military Veteran Peer Network in your state, because we are listened to in all 50 states, or if you are listening in, and if you're listening in the state of Texas, obviously you want to do that in the state of Texas.
Now, 988 is a nationwide for anybody.
Right.
You're a veteran. They ask 988 and press 1 to identify that you're a veteran. And that a lot of people don't know. You can call 988 as a mental health professional and request additional resources. Just let them know when you dial, I'm not in crisis. I just need additional information. They will be more than happy to give you any and all links and anything that you could possibly need or want mental health related. They'll be more than happy to provide that to you.
And we will have that number again in the show notes below the player of this podcast that you are listening to this podcast on. Once again, I would like to thank Calen Bullard for coming by today and for talking with us about his work and about his background and his experiences. And my name is Hasan Sorrells. And with that, we're out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.